Homeless twin girls were pushing a double stroller with twin babies through the snow. When the young billionaire opened the door to his mansion, he discovered a secret that broke his heart. The wind howled mercilessly through the deserted streets of New York, carrying snowflakes that danced in the frigid air before settling on the frozen asphalt. In the midst of the storm that grew fiercer by the minute, two small figures stood out against the white backdrop, fighting against the invisible current that seemed to want to push them back. Emma and Olivia, identical twins only 5 years old, clung with all their might to the baby stroller they were pushing. Their fingers, red and numb from the cold, could barely maintain a firm grip on the frozen metal handles. Their angelic faces, framed by golden curls peeking out from faded hats, were marked by a determination that didn't seem to fit such young children. "We have to keep going, Liv," Emma whispered, her voice almost lost in the roar of the storm. "The babies need us." Olivia nodded silently, blinking to clear the snowflakes accumulating on her eyelashes. In the stroller, protected by layers of tattered blankets, two babies slept, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. The twins moved forward step by step, their tiny boots sinking into the snow that already reached their knees. The neighborhood they passed through was in stark contrast to their ragged appearance. Imposing mansions rose on both sides of the street, their illuminated windows exuding a warmth that seemed to mock the children fighting the cold outside. Emma stumbled, nearly falling, and Olivia quickly grabbed her by the arm. "Careful, Em," she warned, concern evident in her blue eyes. "Remember what Mommy always said. We have to take care of each other." Mentioning their mother made them both stop for a moment, their minds drifting to memories of a past not so distant, yet feeling as if it belonged to another life. The summer sun bathed the small apartment with a golden glow, making the worn-out furniture seem almost new. Sarah, the twins' mother, spun around the living room, holding Emma and Olivia's hands as all three laughed and danced to a cheerful tune playing on the old radio on the table. "My little princesses," Sarah said, her eyes shining with love. "You are the greatest treasure I could ever have. No matter what happens, we'll always be together." The girls smiled, feeling safe and loved in their mother's arms, never imagining that those moments of happiness would soon become just a distant memory. A shrill sound cut through the air, bringing Emma and Olivia back to the harsh reality. One of the babies had woken up and begun to cry, the sound echoing through the deserted street. "Shh, shh," Olivia murmured, leaning over the stroller to try to soothe the little one. "It's going to be okay, I promise." But even she could tell the words rang hollow. The twins hadn't eaten anything since the morning of the previous day, and the cold seemed to be draining the last bit of strength from their frail bodies. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, cruelly reminding them how long it had been since their last decent meal. Emma looked around, desperate for any sign of help. The mansions remained impassive, their doors firmly shut against the cold and any unwanted intruders. For a moment, she considered knocking on one of them, begging for help, but fear stopped her. What if mean people found them? What if they tried to separate them? "We can't stop," Emma said, her voice trembling from cold and exhaustion. "We have to find a safe place for the babies," Olivia agreed, though her eyes betrayed the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm her. The two resumed pushing the stroller, their steps slow and measured in the treacherous snow. As they proceeded down the street, memories continued to assail them, fragments of a life that seemed to have existed long ago. The smell of pancakes filled the small kitchen, making the twins' stomachs growl in anticipation. Sarah smiled as she skillfully flipped the pancakes on the griddle, the sound of sizzling oil blending with the girls' laughter. "Who wants to be my helper today?" Sarah asked, glancing over her shoulder with a conspiratorial smile. "Me! Me!" Emma and Olivia shouted in unison, jumping up from their seats at the table. Sarah laughed, the sound musical and comforting. "You can both help. Emma, you can get the plates, and Olivia, how about choosing the toppings?" The girls hurried off to do their tasks, happy to be useful and to take part in the little family ritual that made each morning special. A particularly strong gust of wind yanked Olivia from her daydream, nearly knocking her over. Emma quickly steadied her, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding. No matter how hard things got, they had each other, and they had the babies to protect. The stroller groaned in protest as the twins pushed it over a particularly tall mound of snow. For one terrifying moment, it seemed like it would tip over, but the girls used all the strength they had left to keep it upright. "Almost there," Emma muttered, though she had no idea where they were going. The snow was falling harder now, cutting visibility down to just a few feet ahead. The mansion lights turned into blurred patches, like distant beacons in a sea of white. The babies began to fuss again, their tiny faces contorted with cold and hunger. Olivia tried to hum a lullaby, the same one their mother used to sing to them, but her voice came out shaky and weak. "Mommy," Emma whispered, a solitary tear freezing on her cheek. "Where are you?" The twins pressed on, two tiny dots of determination in the vast, relentless whiteness. Their steps, though unsteady, carried the power of a love that surpassed their age, a protective instinct that drove them forward even when every movement felt like a struggle. While Emma and Olivia fought against the storm, a few blocks away, in one of the most imposing mansions in the neighborhood, Michael Reeves watched the blizzard through the massive window of his living room, a glass of 30-year-old whiskey in his hand. At 32, Michael was the epitome of success in the public eye. A billionaire, the owner of a real estate empire, and one of New York's most eligible bachelors. Yet, as the city vanished beneath a white mantle, Michael felt only a familiar emptiness. The mansion around him, boasting over 16,000 square feet of ostentatious luxury, seemed to mock his loneliness. Millions worth of artwork adorned the walls, but his eyes barely registered them anymore. The silence was broken only by the occasional crackle from the fireplace and the clink of ice in his glass. Michael took a long sip of his whiskey, savoring the warmth as it slid down his throat. His mind drifted to the day's events, a succession of meetings and negotiations that had culminated in another lucrative acquisition for his portfolio. The latest project, a luxury apartment complex downtown, promised to be his most profitable venture yet. Sure, there were complications. There always were. Families would need to be relocated. Local businesses would close. But it was the price of progress, he told himself. New York was constantly evolving, and he was simply riding the wave of change. A bitter smile curved his lips as he recalled his father's words. "In this world, Michael, you're either a wolf or a lamb, and wolves don't apologize for their nature." From a young age, Michael had embraced that philosophy. Every deal, every acquisition, every courtroom victory pushed him higher, further away from the insecure boy he once was. The fear of poverty, of insignificance, drove him relentlessly. His methods weren't always clean. Bribes here, veiled threats there, manipulating contracts and zoning laws. But the end result always justified the means, or so he told himself on sleepless nights. The phone rang, cutting the silence like a knife. Michael frowned, checking the time. Almost midnight. Who would dare call at this hour? "Michael Reeves," he answered, his voice cold and controlled. "Mr. Reeves." The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "I have information about the Riverside project you'll want to hear." Michael straightened, all his senses on high alert. Riverside was his crown jewel, a multi-billion-dollar development that would transform an entire city area. Who is this? That doesn't matter. What matters is that there are documents. Proof of what really happened to those families you're located. Michael's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, keeping his voice steady. A humorless laugh came from the other end of the line. "Oh, I think you do, Mr. Reeves. The threats, the convenient accidents, the forged reports. It's all documented." Michael gripped the phone so tightly his fingers turned white. "What do you want?" "Consider this just a warning, Mr. Reeves, a reminder that not all the money in the world can bury the truth forever. Sleep well." The line went dead. Michael stood still for a long moment, phone still pressed to his ear. His mind raced, weighing possibilities, threats, and solutions. Who could be behind this? A disgruntled former employee, a displaced resident seeking revenge. With a grunt of frustration, he threw the phone onto the couch. He needed another drink. As he headed to the bar, Michael tried to calm himself. This wasn't the first time he'd faced threats or blackmail. He had a team of lawyers ready to crush any accusation, enough money to silence most people. But something about this call troubled him more than usual. The calm, almost amused tone of the caller, as if they knew something Michael didn't. Pouring himself more whiskey, Michael returned to the window. The snow was falling harder now, turning the outside world into a white blur. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine disappearing into that vast whiteness, leaving behind the deals, the responsibilities, the constant scheming. But no, he was Michael Reeves. He'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to get where he was. No anonymous threat would change that. Determined not to let the call ruin his night, Michael was about to retreat to his office when he heard something. A faint sound, barely audible over the howling wind. Knocking. Someone was knocking at his door. The knocks on the door echoed again, more urgent this time, cutting through the mansion's silence like a sharp blade. Michael Reeves stood still for a few seconds, his body tense, still holding his whiskey glass. The mysterious phone call he'd just received lingered in his mind, keeping him on edge. Who could possibly be at his door at this time of night, in the middle of a snowstorm? His first instinct was to ignore it, pretend he wasn't home. After all, no one in their right mind would expect him to open the door during a storm like this. But the knocking continued, now accompanied by a sound that made Michael furrow his brow in confusion. Was that crying? A child's cry. Driven by curiosity stronger than his usual caution, Michael moved toward the door. Peering through the peephole, he tried to make out something, but the storm made it impossible to see clearly. All he could distinguish were small, indistinct shapes against the furious white of the snow. With an exasperated sigh and a twinge of apprehension, he unlocked the door and opened it. The icy wind struck him immediately, carrying snowflakes into the foyer. But it wasn't the cold that made Michael freeze. It was the sight before him. Two small girls, no older than 5 or 6, stood in his doorway. Identical twins, he realized, with disheveled blonde hair and pale faces from the cold. Their big blue eyes stared at him with a mix of fear and hope. And behind them, a baby stroller. Michael could hear the faint whimpers coming from inside. "Please," one of the girls whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Can we come in?" Michael stood there, mind reeling at the surreal scene before him. Part of him, the cold, calculating part that had gotten him to the top of the business world, told him to shut the door, to call the police, social services, anyone else to deal with this unexpected situation. But another part of him, a part he thought had died long ago, felt inexplicably drawn to the pleading eyes of these children. "Where did you come from?" he managed, his voice harsher than he intended. The other twin stepped forward, placing herself protectively in front of her sister. "Out time our house. It's gone, please, sir, it's so cold." As if to drive the point home, a particularly strong gust of wind blew through, making the girls visibly shiver. Michael looked past them at the snow-covered street. There was no sign of any adults, no cars, nothing but the relentless storm. "Where are your parents?" he asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication passing between them. We don't know," the first twin answered, her voice trembling. "Mommy told us to look after the babies, to find a safe place." The baby's crying grew louder, a distressed sound that somehow pierced Michael's heart. Despite his best efforts to remain detached, he found himself at an impasse. His entire adult life had been built on cold calculation, always doing what was best for his interests. Letting 4 unknown children into his home in the middle of the night went against every instinct of self-preservation he had. But as he hesitated, images of the families he'd displaced for his real estate projects flashed through his mind. Anonymous faces he'd disregarded, lives he'd swept aside as mere obstacles to his success. "Please," the second twin begged again, her small hand gripping the edge of the door, as if afraid it would close at any moment. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, his decision was made. "Come in," he said abruptly, stepping aside. "Quick, before all the heat escapes." The twins needed no second invitation. With surprising strength for such small children, they maneuvered the stroller inside, leaving small trails of melting snow in their wake. Michael shut the door behind them, immediately silencing the roar of the storm. The contrast between the chaos outside and the sudden hush inside was almost surreal. He turned to face his unexpected guests, really seeing them for the first time in the soft light of the foyer. The twins were in a pitiful state, their thin, inadequate clothing wet and torn in places. Their faces and hands were red from the cold, and visible shivers ran through their tiny bodies. The stroller wasn't in much better shape. It was old and worn, with one wheel visibly bent. The babies inside, also twins by the look of it, were wrapped in thin blankets and seemed restless. "You're freezing," Michael murmured, mostly to himself. Years of neglecting his own needs for work had left him ill-prepared to handle this situation. Come. The living room is warmer." He guided the children into the spacious living room, where the fireplace still crackled. The twins immediately moved closer to the fire, stretching their trembling little hands toward the warmth. Michael watched them for a moment, feeling strangely out of place in his own home. Finally, he cleared his throat. You must be hungry." The twins turned to look at him, a mixture of hope and caution in their eyes. They nodded silently. "All right," Michael said, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. I'll see what I can find in the kitchen. Stay here, and don't touch anything," he added, glancing around at the expensive artwork and antiques scattered throughout the room. In the kitchen, Michael found himself staring at the stainless steel fridge as if it might provide answers to the surreal situation he was in. What did one give children to eat? His own diet consisted mostly of expensive ready-made meals and takeout from upscale restaurants. After a few frantic minutes of rummaging, he managed to gather some items that seemed appropriate: apples, cheese, some crackers, and a bottle of milk that he hoped wasn't expired. When he returned to the living room, the twins had settled on the rug near the fireplace, the stroller positioned between them. One of them was leaning over the stroller, murmuring softly to the babies. Michael cleared his throat to announce his presence. "I found some things to eat," he said, placing the makeshift tray on the floor near them. The girls looked at the food with wide eyes, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Can we?" one of them asked timidly. Michael nodded, feeling a twinge of something. Guilt? Pity? He wasn't used to either emotion. "Sure, eat." He watched in silence as the twins devoured the food with a hunger that spoke of days, maybe weeks, of deprivation. They ate methodically, alternating between feeding themselves and offering small pieces of apple and cheese to the babies. Finally, when their pace slowed, Michael sat in a nearby armchair. "So," he began, trying to keep his voice neutral, "you mentioned you lost your home. What exactly happened?" The twins exchanged another of those silent looks, which seemed to hold entire conversations within them. It was the big yellow machine," one of them finally said. "It came one day and started knocking everything down. Mommy said we had to leave quickly." Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. Yellow machines. Demolition. That sounded disturbingly familiar. "And where is your mother now?" He pressed gently. The other twin answered this time, her voice trembling slightly. "We don't know. She left us with the babies and said she'd come back. But that was a long time ago." Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. Part of him wanted to push for more details, to find out exactly where these children had come from. But another part, one he barely recognized, hesitated to cause them more distress. "What are your names?" he asked instead, opting for a gentler approach. "I'm Emma," said the twin who had spoken first. "And this is my sister, Olivia." Olivia waved timidly, her eyes never leaving Michael's face, as if assessing whether he was a threat. "And the babies?" Michael asked, leaning forward slightly to peer into the stroller. "They're our little brothers," Emma replied. "Ethan and Noah." Michael nodded slowly, trying to process it all. 4 children, alone on the street in the middle of a snowstorm. Their home demolished by yellow machines, a missing mother. None of it made sense. You don't have any other family? Anyone who can take care of you?" he asked, half hoping there was a simple solution to this unexpected problem. Emma and Olivia exchanged another look before Emma replied, "No, sir. It's just us and Mommy." Michael sighed, running a hand over his face. He was completely out of his depth. Handling contracts, negotiations, and even threats was one thing. But this, 4 vulnerable children in his living room, this was unknown territory. "Look," he said finally, "it's late and you obviously need rest. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do, okay?" The twins nodded, visible relief on their tired faces. "Thank you, sir," Olivia said softly, speaking directly to Michael for the first time. "You're very kind." Michael felt something stir in his chest at those words. Kind was not an adjective people usually used for him. Ruthless, shrewd, even cruel, yes, but kind. "Never. I'll make up a place for you to sleep," he said, standing abruptly. "Stay here, okay? I'll be right back." As he climbed the stairs toward the guest rooms, Michael tried to organize his thoughts. What was he doing? Letting these children stay was one thing, but then what? He couldn't just keep them here indefinitely. There were protocols to follow, authorities to notify, but something nagged at him. The twins' story, however vague, tugged at something familiar. Yellow machines knocking down houses. That sounded like one of his urban renewal projects. But surely he would have known if there were children involved, right? After preparing one of the guest rooms with clean sheets and extra pillows, Michael returned to the living room. The scene he found took him by surprise. Emma and Olivia were curled up on the sofa, the babies nestled between them. All 4 children were fast asleep. Exhausted by the ordeal they'd been through, it was so peaceful, so domestic, that Michael felt something tighten inside him. For a moment, he considered waking them and taking them upstairs to the room he'd prepared, but they looked so comfortable, so at peace, that he didn't have the heart. Instead, he grabbed some blankets from a nearby cabinet and gently placed them over the sleeping children. Stepping back quietly, Michael found himself at the window again, watching the continuing storm outside. His reflection in the glass stared back, and for the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man he saw. With a heavy sigh, he picked up his phone. There were calls to make, information to gather. He needed to know more about these children, about their story. And more importantly, he needed to find out if somehow, however indirectly, he was responsible for their situation. Casting one last look at the sleeping children on the sofa, Michael left the living room, closing the door softly behind him. It would be a long night, and he had a lot to discover before morning. The next few hours passed in a blur of whispered phone calls and frantic internet searches. Michael used every contact and resource at his disposal to try to find the children's origins, but the information was frustratingly scarce. There were no recent records of demolitions in residential areas matching the twins' vague descriptions. No reports of missing children that fit their profile. It was as if the 4 of them had appeared out of nowhere, carried in by the storm. As the night wore on, Michael grew more and more frustrated and intrigued. The pieces simply didn't add up. How could 4 children vanish without a trace? And why did their story, however vague, feel so familiar? Exhausted and with more questions than answers, Michael finally decided to get some sleep. Tomorrow, he thought, he'd have a chance to talk more with the twins, maybe gather more details that could help unravel the mystery. Before turning in, he made one last silent visit to the living room. The children were still fast asleep, their small forms almost hidden under the blankets. For a moment, Michael simply watched them, feeling a strange mix of confusion and something else, something he couldn't name. Climbing the stairs to his bedroom, Michael couldn't help but notice how his enormous mansion, always so silent and empty, felt different tonight. The children's presence, though temporary, had brought a subtle but noticeable change to the atmosphere. Lying in his luxurious bed, Michael found himself unable to sleep. His thoughts kept drifting back to the twins and the babies, to their mysterious story, and to the unsettling sense that somehow he was connected to it all. When the sun finally began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Michael was already up. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a silent, white world. Standing at his bedroom window, looking out at the pristine snow covering everything in sight, he made a decision. Today he would get answers. No matter what it took, he would find out the truth about Emma, Olivia, Ethan, and Noah. And more importantly, he would discover his role in this unexpected story that had literally knocked on his door. With that resolve in mind, Michael prepared to face the day and whatever revelations it might bring. Little did he know that the answers he sought would change not only the lives of those 4 sleeping children, but also his own, in ways he could never have imagined. The sun had barely risen when Michael Reeves was already in his office, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, typically firm and authoritative, now carried a barely disguised urgency. "I want a full investigation, Johnson. Make it clear to your team. Discretion is the key word here. No fuss, no unnecessary questions, just results." On the other end of the line, Michael's most trusted private investigator acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. "Don't worry, Mr. Reeves. We'll handle this carefully. Any initial info you can give us?" Michael hesitated a moment, his eyes drifting unconsciously to the closed door of his office, beyond which 4 mysterious children slept. 4 children, twin girls around 5 years old, twin baby boys. Apparently lost their home recently due to some kind of demolition. The mother is missing. No known relatives. There was a pause on the other end, and Michael could almost hear the gears turning in the detective's mind. "Understood, sir. We'll start right away. I'll need more details on the kids, names, physical descriptions, anything about where they might have come from." "I'll email everything within the hour," Michael replied, already organizing the scant information he'd gathered over the past 24 hours in his mind. "And Johnson, I want daily updates, no matter how insignificant the details may seem." After hanging up, Michael leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples in a tired gesture. The sleepless night and the tension of the situation were starting to wear on him, but there was no time to rest. There was much to do. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening up. The door opened slowly, revealing Emma and Olivia, still wearing the oversized clothes he had improvised for them the previous night. Their golden hair was tousled from sleep, and their eyes, though still marked with fatigue, seemed more alive than before. "Good morning, sir," Emma said timidly. "Sorry to bother you." "It's just, well, the babies are awake and hungry," Olivia finished, urgency in her voice. Michael stood up quickly, feeling oddly unprepared. Of course. Let's see what we can do about that." As he guided the twins back to the living room, where the babies were starting to fuss in the makeshift crib he'd set up, Michael observed the girls more closely. There was something about the way they moved and spoke that seemed out of place for children so young. In the kitchen, as he prepared baby bottles after a quick Google search on how to do it properly, Michael decided to try extracting more information. "So," he began casually, measuring out the formula, "you mentioned yesterday a yellow machine. Can you tell me more about that?" The twins exchanged a quick look, that silent communication he'd noticed before. "It was scary," Olivia finally said, her voice low. "It made a lot of noise. And the dust. There was so much dust." "Yeah," Emma agreed, her eyes distant, as if reliving the memory. "Mommy got really mad. She yelled at the men in helmets, but they didn't stop." Michael felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This sounded uncomfortably like one of his so-called urban renewal operations, but surely he'd have known if there were children involved, right? "And after that?" he pressed gently, handing the bottles to the girls. "Where did you go?" Again, that exchange of glances. "Lots of places," Emma answered vaguely. "But none of them were like our home." Michael nodded, sensing he wouldn't get much more out of them just yet. The twins seemed naturally adept at being evasive when they wanted to be. The following days fell into a strange but not entirely unpleasant routine. Michael, used to spending most of his time in business meetings or locked in his office, now found himself engaged in activities he never imagined doing. He learned how to change diapers, a skill he vowed never to mention in his social circles, how to make simple meals the kids would actually eat, and even how to tell bedtime stories, though his version of Cinderella was decidedly more business-oriented than the traditional tale. Meanwhile, Johnson's daily updates were frustrating in their lack of solid progress. No record of missing children matching these descriptions, no recent demolitions fitting the twins' vague story. It was as if the children had simply emerged out of nowhere. One particularly calm afternoon, while Michael watched Emma and Olivia playing in the snow-covered backyard, Olivia made a comment that changed everything. "You know," she said casually, shaping a snowball, "this snow reminds me of the day the big yellow machine came. It was snowing like this, except the snow got all dirty from the dust when our house fell." Michael, who was checking emails on his phone, nearly dropped it. "Wait, what?" "It was snowing when your house was demolished." Olivia seemed to realize she'd said something significant because she quickly changed the subject, asking if they could build a snowman. But Michael's mind was already racing. If it had been snowing when the house was torn down, that meant it had happened recently, very recently. Which made it even stranger that there were no records or reports about it. That night, after putting the children to bed, a task he was starting to enjoy, surprisingly, Michael made another call to Johnson. "I want you to redo the entire search," he instructed, "but this time focus only on the past 2 months, and pay special attention to any demolition activity that happened during recent snowstorms." As he waited for new leads, Michael found himself spending more and more time with the children. He watched in fascination as Emma and Olivia cared for the babies with a competence that seemed beyond their years. They always seemed to know exactly what Ethan and Noah needed, even before they started crying. During one of these observations, Michael noticed something off about Noah. The baby seemed quieter than usual, his skin hot to the touch. "I think he has a fever," Emma said, worry evident in her voice. "Mommy always told us to look out for that." Michael felt a surge of panic. Infant illnesses weren't exactly part of his skill set, but seeing the fear in the twins' eyes, he knew he had to act. The next few hours were a blur of cold compresses, temperature checks, and frantic consultations of medical websites. Michael found himself cradling Noah against his chest, murmuring comforting words he hadn't even realized he knew. At some point during that long night, as he rocked the feverish baby, Michael realized something had changed. These weren't just 4 small strangers who had invaded his orderly life. Somehow, at some moment, he had started to care. Genuinely care. When the sun finally rose and Noah's fever began to subside, Michael looked at the 4 children sleeping around him. The twins had insisted on staying up to help, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond making money and building empires. He needed to find out the truth about these children, not just out of curiosity or self-preservation, but because, somehow, their well-being had become important to him. His phone vibrated in his pocket, the screen showing Johnson's name. Carefully, so as not to wake Noah, who was still in his arms, Michael answered. "Mr. Reeves," Johnson's voice sounded urgent. "I think we've found something. Something you need to see right away." Michael looked at the sleeping children, then at the baby in his arms. Whatever Johnson had discovered, he knew it was about to change everything. And for the first time in his life, Michael Reeves wasn't sure he was ready for the truth. As the sun began to rise over the city, casting a golden light through the mansion's windows, Michael found himself at a crossroads. Johnson's urgent tone on the phone promised answers, but the sleeping children around him, especially little Noah, still fragile after the night's fever, made him hesitate. "How long do you need to get here, Johnson?" Michael asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the children's sleep. "I can be there in 30 minutes, Mr. Reeves," the detective replied. Michael looked at the children again. "Make it an hour. And Johnson, come prepared for a longer stay. I think we'll have a lot to discuss." After hanging up, Michael carefully placed Noah back into the makeshift crib. The baby stirred a bit but didn't wake up. Next to him, Ethan slept peacefully, unaware of the drama unfolding around them. Emma and Olivia were curled up under blankets on the couch, their angelic faces finally resting after days of worry. Michael found himself studying their features, searching for clues about their past, about the story he still couldn't fully piece together. With a sigh, he headed to the kitchen to make coffee. It would be a long morning, and he needed to be alert for whatever Johnson had uncovered. As the coffee maker hummed softly, Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. In just a few days, his life had been turned upside down. The man who once prided himself on his ruthless business sense, who saw people as mere pawns on his corporate chessboard, now found himself deeply invested in the welfare of 4 small children. The sound of soft footsteps broke his train of thought. Emma entered the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Michael," she murmured. "Is Noah better?" Michael felt an involuntary smile form on his lips. "Yes, Emma. His fever went down during the night. He's going to be fine." Relief washed over the girl's face. "That's good." Olivia and I were really worried. There was something in the maturity of her response, the depth of her concern, that once again made Michael wonder about the girl's past. What had they been through to develop such a sense of responsibility at such a young age? "Emma," he began carefully, "you know you can trust me, right? If there's anything you want to tell me, anything about you, Olivia, and the babies." The girl looked at him with her big blue eyes, a flicker of emotion passing through them. For a moment, Michael thought she would open up, reveal the mystery that surrounded them. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, the moment passed. "Thank you, Mr. Michael," she said simply. "You've been very good to us." Before Michael could press further, the doorbell rang, announcing Johnson's arrival. The moment of truth had come. "Emma, why don't you go check on the others? I have a friend coming over to discuss some business." The girl nodded obediently and left the kitchen, giving Michael one last curious glance before disappearing down the hallway. Taking one final sip of coffee for courage, Michael went to answer the door. Johnson stood there, a thick folder under his arm and a grave expression on his face. "Mr. Reeves," the detective greeted him with a curt nod. "You might want to sit down for this." Leading Johnson to his office, Michael threw one last look at the living room where the children were. Whatever the detective had discovered, he knew nothing would be the same afterward. Closing the office door behind him, Michael prepared to finally unravel the mystery that had literally knocked on his door on that snowy night. Little did he know, the revelations to come would change not only his perception of the children, but also of himself and the empire he'd built. Michael shut the office door, the click of the lock sounding oddly final. Johnson was already seated, the thick folder open on the polished mahogany desk. The contrast between the room's formality and the personal nature of this investigation was not lost on Michael. "What did you find, Johnson?" Michael asked, his voice more tense than he cared to admit. The detective took a deep breath before beginning. "Mr. Reeves, do you remember the Riverside Project?" Michael frowned. Of course he remembered. It was one of his most ambitious and controversial undertakings, a plan to revitalize a rundown area of the city into a luxurious neighborhood. "Yes, of course. What about it?" Johnson slid a photo across the desk. It was an aerial shot of a neighborhood, clearly taken before the demolitions began. Modest houses lined narrow streets, a few trees here and there, and a small park in the center. "This was Mill Creek," Johnson said, "home to about 200 families until 3 months ago." Michael picked up the photo, studying it carefully. There was something familiar about the view, but he couldn't quite place it. Johnson continued, "Eviction notices started going out about 6 months ago. Most families had already left when the demolitions began, but there were complications." "What kind of complications?" Michael asked, though part of him already suspected. The detective pulled another document from the folder, a police report. There were protests. Some residents refused to leave. Things escalated. Michael felt his stomach turn. He remembered hearing something about protests, but at the time, it had seemed like just another obstacle to overcome. His lawyers had assured him everything was handled legally. "Go on," he said, his voice hoarse. Johnson hesitated briefly before continuing. "Mr. Reeves, we found records of one family in particular, the Thompsons. Sarah Thompson, single mother, 4 children, twin girls, age 5, and newborn twin boys," Michael finished, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The detective nodded gravely. "Exactly." Sarah was one of the leaders of the resistance movement. She disappeared the night the demolitions began. Michael stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the day was bright and clear, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside him. "The children," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, Olivia, Ethan, and Noah. It's them, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," Johnson confirmed. "No doubt about it. And there's more." Michael turned, facing the detective. "More?" Johnson pulled one last document from the folder. It was a photograph. A young, pretty woman smiled at the camera. Two identical girls in her arms. "This is Sarah Thompson, sir. Taken a few months before the Riverside project started." Michael picked up the picture with trembling hands. The woman's face was achingly familiar in a way that made his heart clench. He'd seen her before, shouting at one of the protests, her voice drowned by the roar of the demolition machines. At the time, he'd dismissed her as just another troublesome protester. "My God," he murmured, sinking heavily into his chair. "What have I done?" A heavy silence followed, laden with the weight of revelation. Michael felt like he was seeing his entire life, all his decisions, in a new light. Every building he'd raised, every deal he'd closed, now felt tainted by the shadow of what had happened in Mill Creek. "Mr. Reeves," Johnson finally said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "What would you like me to do now?" Michael looked at the photo of Sarah, at the smiling faces of Emma and Olivia, so different from the solemn, cautious children now sleeping in his home. "Nothing," he said after a long pause. "You've done your job, Johnson. Now, it's up to me." After the detective left, Michael remained in his office for a long time, the evidence spread out before him like a macabre puzzle. Each document, each photo, told a story of interrupted lives, of displaced families, all in the name of progress and profit. Guilt consumed him, threatening to overwhelm him. How could he look those children in the eye now, knowing what he knew? How could he continue to pretend he was just a generous benefactor, when in reality he was the architect of their tragedy? Michael stood, pacing back and forth in his office, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of him wanted to run to the living room, confess everything to the twins, beg for forgiveness. But another part, the part that had survived and thrived in the ruthless business world, warned him against such a rash move. He stopped at the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds of his mansion. Outside, everything looked so peaceful, so normal. But inside these walls, a silent drama was unfolding, one in which he was both protagonist and antagonist. With a heavy sigh, Michael decided he needed to see the children. Not to confess, not yet, but to, what? Observe them. Try to better understand the impact of his actions. He wasn't sure. Leaving his office, he walked quietly to the living room. The twins were there, playing quietly with some toys he'd bought for them. The babies slept peacefully in their makeshift cribs. For a moment, Michael stood in the doorway, just watching. Emma and Olivia looked so innocent, so unaware of the storm inside him. How could he be responsible for so much suffering? "Mr. Michael," Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Michael forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as false as it felt. "Yes, Emma. I just came to see how you're all doing." Olivia looked at him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see more than a 5-year-old should. "You look sad," she noted. I've been thinking about some tough things," Michael replied, careful not to reveal too much. "Nothing you need to worry about." The twins exchanged a glance, that silent communication passing between them. There was something in that look that made Michael wonder how much they really understood, how much they suspected. "Mr. Michael," Emma began hesitantly, Have you found out anything about our mommy?" The question hit Michael like a punch to the gut. How could he answer that? How could he look into that hopeful child's eyes and say yes, he had found something, but that the truth was far worse than she could imagine? I'm still looking, Emma," he answered, hating himself for yet another lie. "But I promise I won't give up until I find her." Olivia moved closer, her gaze locked on Michael. "You're lying," she said simply. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. What? Mommy always told us we could see it in people's eyes when they're lying, Olivia explained. And yours look different. Michael swallowed hard, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way he never had before. These children, these little victims of his greed, seemed capable of seeing through all the defenses he'd carefully constructed. I'm not lying, Olivia, he said, knowing that each word only dragged him deeper into the pit of deceit he'd created. I really am looking for your mother. It's just that sometimes grown-up things are complicated. Emma joined her sister, both of them standing united in front of him. Why are they complicated? She asked. It's either mommy or not. Why can't you just tell us? Michael felt sweat bead on his forehead. How had he gotten to this point? How had he, a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, been cornered by two 5-year-olds? Girls, he began, trying to keep his voice steady. I promise I'm doing everything I can to find your mother. But some things take time. And sometimes we don't have all the answers right away. The twins watched him for a long moment, their identical eyes seeming to pierce his soul. Finally, Emma spoke. Okay, Mr. Michael, we understand. But the tone of her voice made it clear they didn't understand. Not really. And worse, that they didn't believe him. Michael felt a wave of nausea. He needed to get out of there, needed air. I have some calls to make, he murmured, already turning toward the door. You'll be okay here. The girls nodded silently, their gazes following him as he practically fled the room. Back in his office, Michael closed the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. What was he doing? How could he keep up this charade? His gaze fell on the photo of Sarah Thompson lying on his desk. Her smile, once so full of life and love, now seemed to mock him. Here was a woman who had fought tooth and nail to protect her family and her community. And in his arrogance and greed, he had destroyed it all. Michael approached the desk, picking up the photo with trembling hands. He traced Sarah's face with a finger, as if he could reach her across time and space. I'm so sorry, he whispered to the image. I really am. But he knew apologies weren't enough. Words couldn't undo the damage he'd caused. Actions were needed. But what actions? How could he even begin to fix something so monumental? Michael sank into his chair, his mind whirling with possibilities and consequences. He could use his money, of course. He could set up relief funds for displaced families, rebuild houses, offer jobs. But would that be enough? Would it erase the trauma, the loss, the pain he had inflicted? Then there was the question of Sarah. Where was she? What had happened to her that fateful night? Was she alive? And if she was, why hadn't she returned for her daughters? Michael lifted his phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. He could mobilize resources, hire the best investigators, use all his influence to find her. But what if the truth was worse than he imagined? What if Sarah was... He couldn't finish the thought. The idea was too painful, the implications too devastating. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his dark musings. Come in, he called, quickly stashing Sarah's photo in a drawer. The door opened, revealing Emma. She looked small and vulnerable standing there, her big eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. Mr. Michael, she said softly. I wanted to say sorry. Michael blinked in surprise. Sorry. For what, Emma? The little girl entered the office, her hands nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. For saying you were lying. It wasn't polite. Michael felt his heart clench. Here was this child, who had lost so much, apologizing to the man who, without her knowing, was responsible for her tragedy. Oh, Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You don't have to apologize. I understand why you and Olivia are frustrated. You have every right to ask questions, to want answers. Emma approached the desk, her eyes roaming curiously over the papers and photos spread out. Michael quickly covered the more incriminating documents, hoping she hadn't seen anything telling. Are you really looking for our mommy? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. Michael swallowed hard, the weight of his lies threatening to crush him. Yes, Emma, I am. The girl nodded slowly, as if processing the information. Then, to Michael's surprise, She reached out and picked up one of the papers he hadn't managed to hide in time. It was a map of the Mill Creek neighborhood, marked with red X's indicating the houses that had been demolished. "Hey," Emma said, her eyes widening. "This looks like—" Michael quickly took the map back, his heart pounding. "It's nothing, Emma. Just some work papers." But it was too late. He could see in her eyes that something had changed. A seed of suspicion had been planted. "Mr. Michael," Emma said slowly, "why do you have a map of our neighborhood?" Michael felt panic rising, but years of tough negotiations helped him maintain composure. He forced a calm smile, hoping Emma wouldn't notice the trembling in his hands. "It's just part of the investigation, Emma," he said, trying to sound casual. "To find your mother, we need to understand where she was last." Emma frowned, her eyes drifting to the map now hidden under other papers. But those red marks, they looked like they were right where our house used to be. Michael felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. How could a 5-year-old be so perceptive? He needed to change the subject, fast. "Emma," he said, leaning forward, "how about we go see how Olivia and the babies are doing? Maybe we can all have some ice cream after lunch." The mention of ice cream seemed to momentarily distract Emma, her eyes lighting up. "Really? We can?" "Sure," Michael replied, relieved to have avoided disaster for now. "Let's go." As he led Emma out of the office, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope. How much longer could he keep this secret? And what would happen when the truth inevitably came out? Back in the living room, Olivia looked at them curiously. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes moving from Emma to Michael. "All good," Michael answered, perhaps too quickly. "Actually, I was thinking we could all go out for some ice cream later. What do you say?" The twins exchanged excited looks, but Michael noticed a hint of doubt in Olivia's eyes. She was obviously the more cautious of the two, and he knew he'd have to be extra careful around her. While the girls chatted excitedly about ice cream flavors, Michael found himself watching the babies, Ethan and Noah, so small and innocent, unaware of the drama playing out around them. What would happen to them if the truth came to light? If the authorities found out? The thought of losing the children, of seeing them placed into foster care, made his stomach turn. When had that happened? When had he started caring so much about these 4 little lives? The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normality. The ice cream outing, a quiet dinner, bedtime routines. Michael caught himself scrutinizing the twins' every move, looking for signs that they suspected more. Finally, with the children asleep, Michael retreated to his office. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, not with the weight of this secret pressing on his chest. Sitting in his chair, he picked up the photo of Sarah Thompson again. Her smile, once so full of life, now seemed accusatory. "What do I do?" he whispered to the picture. "How can I fix this?" But the photo remained silent, Sarah's eyes fixed on a point beyond him, as if she could see a future he couldn't yet imagine. With a heavy sigh, Michael picked up his phone. There was one call he needed to make, a decision he could no longer delay. "Johnson, it's me. I need you to assemble the best search team you can find, no matter the cost. We're going to find Sarah Thompson." As he gave the detective instructions, Michael knew he was stepping into uncharted territory. He was risking everything, his reputation, his fortune, possibly even his freedom, in the hope of making things right. But looking at the photo of Sarah, at Emma and Olivia's smiling faces, he knew he had no choice. For the first time in his life, Michael Reeves was doing something not for profit or power, but because it was the right thing to do. When he finally hung up the phone, the sun was already starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day was beginning, bringing with it the promise of change and perhaps redemption. Michael stood and walked over to the window. Outside, the world kept spinning, oblivious to the drama unfolding within these walls. But for him, and for the 4 small lives under his roof, nothing would ever be the same. Casting one last glance at Sarah's photo, Michael made a silent vow. He would find answers. He would fix what he'd broken. And somehow he would find a way to make peace with his past. The path ahead would be long and difficult, filled with obstacles and painful revelations. But for the first time in a long time, Michael Reeves felt something he thought no longer existed. Hope. The sun had barely risen when Michael Reeves walked into his boardroom, determination etched on his face. Around the long mahogany table, his partners and lawyers waited, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Gentlemen," Michael began, his voice firm, "thank you for coming at such an early hour. We have a lot to discuss." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the familiar faces. These were men with whom he'd built an empire, people who counted on him to make decisions that would maximize their profits. What he was about to propose went against everything they'd done so far. "As you know," he continued, "I've been dealing with a personal situation these past few days. That situation has led me to reevaluate many things, including how we conduct our business." A murmur went through the room. Michael could see confusion and worry mounting in the eyes of his associates. "Michael," interrupted James Harrington, his oldest partner, "what exactly are we talking about here?" Michael took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I'm talking about using our resources, a significant portion of them, to right some of the wrongs of the past. Specifically, I want to initiate a large-scale search for a woman named Sarah Thompson." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, suddenly, the room exploded in voices. "Who the hell is Sarah Thompson? Michael, have you lost your mind? Is this about those kids you took in?" Michael raised his hands for quiet. "I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out." For the next 30 minutes, Michael explained the situation, omitting some of the more incriminating details, but making it clear how important finding Sarah was. He spoke about corporate responsibility, about doing the right thing, about the human cost of their past developments. When he finished, the room was silent again. But this time, it was a silence filled with tension and disbelief. It was Gerald Matthews, the company's chief lawyer, who finally broke the silence. "Michael, I understand you're going through something, but what you're proposing is insane from a legal standpoint. We're talking about admitting guilt in a case that could cost us millions, if not billions." Michael nodded, having anticipated this reaction. "I understand your concerns, Gerald, but I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of a decision I've already made." Another wave of murmurs swept the room. James Harrington stood up, his face red with anger. "You can't do this, Michael, not alone. Jito, we have shareholders, we have obligations." "Exactly," Michael replied calmly. "We have obligations, and it's time we take responsibility for what we did in Mill Creek." The mention of Mill Creek caused more agitation. Everyone there knew the Riverside project had been controversial, but few knew all the sordid details. "If we do this," Gerald warned, "we're opening ourselves up to a flood of lawsuits. Every displaced family, every closed business, they'll all come after us." Michael nodded again. "I know, and I'm prepared for that. In fact, I want to start setting up a compensation fund for all families affected by our projects in the last 5 years." The room erupted in protest. Michael let it go on for a few minutes before raising his voice. "Enough. I know this isn't what you expected to hear today. I know it goes against everything we've built, but things have changed. I have changed." He paused, letting his gaze roam the room one more time. "Those of you who want out, who don't agree with this new direction, I understand. I'll buy your shares at market value plus a 20% premium. But for those who stay, I promise we'll find a way to do business that's profitable and ethical." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael could see the gears turning in his partners' minds, calculating losses and gains, risks and opportunities. Finally, to everyone's surprise, it was old Frank Donovan, usually quiet in meetings, who spoke up. "You know, Michael," he said, his voice gravelly with age, "when I started in this business more years ago than I care to admit, this is how we did things. We cared about people, not just profits. Maybe it's time we return to our roots." A murmur of agreement went around the table, not from everyone, certainly, but from some. It was a start. Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Frank. Anyone else?" In the hours that followed, plans were made and strategies outlined. Some partners left, vowing never to speak to Michael again. Others stayed, intrigued by the idea of a new way of doing business. By the time the meeting ended, it was already past noon. Michael found himself alone in the room, exhausted, yet strangely energized. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Johnson. "We found a lead on Sarah Thompson, St. Mary's Hospital." "Come immediately." Michael's heart raced. After days of fruitless searching, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. He rushed to his car, instructing his driver to head to the hospital as fast as possible. During the ride, his mind swirled with possibilities. What condition would Sarah be in? How would he explain everything to the children? St. Mary's Hospital was an old, worn building, clearly underfunded and overburdened. Michael felt a pang of guilt thinking about how many hospitals like this could have been improved with the money he'd wasted on unnecessary luxuries. Johnson waited for him at the entrance. "This way, Mr. Reeves. But I should warn you, the situation is delicate." They walked through crowded corridors, past patients on gurneys and overworked nurses. Finally, they reached a treatment ward. "She's been here since the night of the demolition," Johnson explained quietly. "Brought in as a construction accident victim. She suffered severe injuries but has been slowly recovering." Michael felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "Is she conscious? Does she know who she is?" Johnson nodded grimly. "Yes, but she hasn't spoken much. Doctors think it might be emotional trauma as well as physical." They stopped at a closed door. Michael hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. Behind this door was the mother of the girls he'd taken in, the woman whose life he'd inadvertently destroyed. Taking a shaky breath, he turned the handle. Sarah Thompson was sitting up in bed, looking out the window. She seemed pale and fragile, but when she turned to Michael, her eyes were clear and alert. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "My name is Michael Reeves," he began, approaching cautiously. I came to help." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You're the man who destroyed my home," she finally said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Michael felt the crushing weight of guilt. "Yes," he admitted, "and I'm here to try to fix it." He quickly explained about the children, how they'd shown up at his door, how he'd taken care of them. With each word, he watched a range of emotions pass over Sarah's face: relief, fear, anger, hope. "Where are they now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They're safe," Michael assured her. "At my home. But they miss you terribly. Sarah, I want to help reunite your family. I want to transfer you to a better medical facility. Make sure you get the best care possible." Sarah looked at him distrustfully. "Why? Why would you care?" Michael drew a deep breath. It was time for the painful truth. "Because I'm the one who caused this," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "The Riverside project on the Mill Creek demolition. It was my decision. And now I'm trying to fix what I did wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael could see a storm of emotions in Sarah's eyes: shock, anger, pain, confusion. "You," she finally said, her voice trembling. "You ruined our lives. Our home, our community." Michael lowered his head, unable to face the accusation in her eyes. "I know," he said softly, "and there aren't enough apologies in the world for what I did. But I'm here now, Sarah. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, tears threatening to spill. "How?" she asked finally. "How can you fix something like this?" Michael lifted his gaze, meeting hers. "Starting now," he said, "I'm transferring you to the best hospital in the city. I'll make sure you get the best treatment possible, and I'll bring your children to see you. Emma, Olivia, Ethan, and Noah, they're waiting for you." At the mention of her children's names, something broke inside Sarah. The tears she'd been holding back finally began to fall. "My babies," she sobbed. I thought I'd never see them again." Michael moved closer, tentatively offering her a tissue. "They're all right, Sarah. They're amazing. And they never lost hope of finding you." Sarah took the tissue, dabbing at her tears. When she looked at Michael again, there was a new determination in her eyes. "I want to see them," she said. "Now." Michael nodded. "I'll bring them immediately." But first, let's arrange your transfer." In the hours that followed, Michael used all his influence and resources to ensure Sarah was moved to Langone Medical Center, one of the best hospitals in the city. He personally oversaw every detail, making sure she had the finest room, the best doctors, everything top-notch. Meanwhile, he called his housekeeper, asking her to get the children ready for a hospital visit. He knew he needed to prepare Emma and Olivia for what they would see, but how to explain without revealing all the truth? Finally, with Sarah settled comfortably in her new room, Michael went to pick up the children. The car ride was silent, the twins watching him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Where are we going, Mr. Michael?" Emma finally asked. Michael took a deep breath. "Girls, remember how I told you I was looking for your mom?" They both nodded, their eyes growing wide with anticipation. "Well," Michael continued carefully, "we found her. She's in the hospital, recovering from an accident, and we're going to see her now." The car filled with exclamations of joy and anxious questions. Michael did his best to answer, always careful not to reveal his part in the events that had separated their family. When they reached the hospital, Michael had to restrain the twins from running through the corridors. "Remember," he gently cautioned, "your mom is still recovering. We need to be calm and careful." At last, they reached Sarah's room. Michael knelt down to the twins' level. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Emma and Olivia nodded, their small hands clutching his. Michael opened the door. The moment Sarah saw her daughters was something Michael would never forget. Her face lit up with a love so pure, so intense, he felt his heart tighten. The girls froze for a second, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then, with shouts of "Mommy!" they ran to her bedside. Michael stood back, watching the family reunite in a rush of tears, laughter, and hugs. He felt both part of it and completely separate, the unwilling architect of this meeting, but also the reason they'd been apart in the first place. When the initial wave of emotion subsided, Sarah looked up over her daughters' heads, her eyes meeting Michael's. There was a silent question there, one he knew he'd have to answer soon. In the days that followed, Michael divided his time between the hospital and his company. At the hospital, he watched Sarah's slow recovery, amazed by her strength and resilience. The children spent every possible moment with their mother, filling the room with laughter and stories. At the office, Michael led a quiet revolution. The compensation fund was being established. New affordable housing projects were planned, and a new code of ethics was implemented. Not everyone was happy about the changes, but Michael stood firm in his new vision. One quiet afternoon at the hospital, while the children napped after a long play session, Sarah finally brought up the elephant in the room. "Michael," she said softly, "I think it's time we talked." Michael nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He knew this moment would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier. "The kids told me how you found them, how you took care of them," Sarah began. "But there's something that doesn't add up. Why would you, a billionaire, care so much about 4 homeless kids?" Michael took a deep breath, gathering the courage for the confession he was about to make. "Sarah, the truth is, I'm responsible for what happened to you and your family. The Riverside Project, the demolition of Mill Creek, all of it was my doing." He saw shock and pain cross Sarah's face, but pushed on before he lost his nerve. "I didn't care about the real consequences of my actions. But when your daughters showed up at my door that snowy night, something changed. For the first time, I saw the real human cost of my greed." Sarah regarded him intently, her expression a mask of conflicting emotions. "You destroyed our lives," she said, her voice trembling. "Our home, our community." "I know," Michael replied, guilt raw in his voice, "and there aren't enough excuses in the world for what I did. But I'm here now trying to make it right, not just for you and your kids, but for every family affected by my developments." He explained about the compensation fund, the new housing projects, the changes at his company. Sarah listened in silence, her emotions unreadable. When he finished, a heavy pause followed. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I want to hate you, Michael. A part of me really does, but I see how my children look at you. I hear the stories they tell, and now hearing all this, I don't know what to think." Michael nodded, fully understanding her confusion. I don't expect your forgiveness, Sarah. I don't deserve it. But I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you and your kids have a safe, stable future. Sarah studied him for a long moment before replying, Forgiveness is a process, Michael. It's not something I can just hand over. But I'm willing to try. For my children, for our community, and maybe even for you. Sarah's words, though not an outright pardon, brought a wave of relief washing over Michael. It was more than he expected, more than he felt he deserved. Thank you, Sarah, he said softly. I promise I won't let you down. In the days that followed, a new dynamic began to form. Michael continued his regular visits, bringing the children to see Sarah and assisting with her recovery. The twins, noticing the shift in the adults' relationship, started asking questions. One day, Emma, ever the more observant of the two, approached Michael. Mr. Michael, she began tentatively, why does Mommy sometimes look at you in a strange way? Like she's sad and happy at the same time. Michael exchanged a glance with Sarah, who nodded slightly. It was time for the truth. Emma, Olivia, he said, gathering the girls close. There's something I need to tell you. Something about me, about what happened to your home. Over the next few minutes, Michael explained in the simplest, kindest way he could, his role in the events that had changed their lives. He saw confusion, sadness, and even anger flicker across the girls' faces. So, it was your fault, Olivia asked, tears pooling in her eyes. Michael nodded sadly. Yes, Olivia. It was my fault, and I'm so sorry, more than I can ever say. A tense silence followed. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Emma who spoke. But you're trying to fix it, right? That's why you're helping us. Michael felt his heart clench at the girl's perceptiveness. Yes, Emma, that's why. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm doing everything I can to make things better. The twins exchanged one of their silent looks, a conversation passing between them without words. Finally, Emma turned to him. We don't like what you did, she said seriously, but do we like you now? And you're helping Mommy. So, I think we can try to forgive you. Right, Liv? Olivia nodded slowly. Yes, but you have to promise you'll never hurt anyone like that again. Michael felt tears form in his eyes. I promise, he said solemnly, never again. Sarah, who had been watching quietly, reached out and took Michael's hand. Together, she said softly, we'll do what's right. At that moment, looking at Sarah and the children, Michael felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. The road ahead would still be long and difficult, but for the first time, he wasn't alone. He had a chance at redemption, a chance to truly make a difference in people's lives. And he was determined not to waste that chance. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the city as Michael Reeves entered his office. The space, once cold and impersonal, now showed subtle signs of change. Photos of Emma, Olivia, Ethan, and Noah sat on his desk, a constant reminder of why he had transformed. With a determined sigh, Michael powered on his computer and opened the document he had been working on tirelessly for the past few weeks. The title at the top read, New Beginnings Foundation, Official Proposal. As he reread the document, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. Just a few months ago, his only concern was increasing his company's profits, no matter the human cost. Now, he was about to launch a foundation dedicated to helping the very people he once considered mere obstacles on his path to success. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Reeves, his assistant, Jennifer, called. Sarah Thompson is here to see you. Michael felt a rush of mixed emotions at the mention of Sarah's name. Gratitude, guilt, a sense of responsibility. Thank you, Jennifer. Please send her in. Sarah entered, bringing an energy to the room that Michael still couldn't quite define. She looked stronger, healthier than she had after leaving the hospital. Her eyes, once full of distrust when they fell on Michael, now showed caution and something else. Respect, perhaps. Good morning, Michael, Sarah greeted him, sitting in the chair opposite his desk. The kids send their regards. Emma and Olivia insisted I give you this, She handed him a colorful drawing of 5 stick figures, clearly representing Michael, Sarah, and the 3 children, holding hands under a smiling sun. Michael took the drawing, feeling a lump in his throat. "Thank you," he managed. "How are they settling into the new house?" Sarah's face lit up. "They love it, Michael. Especially the backyard. Yesterday we spent the entire afternoon planting a little garden. The twins are convinced they'll grow the biggest pumpkins in the world." Michael smiled, imagining the scene. The house he had given the Thompson family was modest compared to his own mansion, but he'd made sure it had everything Sarah and the kids might need, including a spacious yard where the children could play and grow. "I'm glad to hear it," Michael replied. "And you, Sarah, how are you feeling?" Sarah paused, considering his question. "Better every day," she said at last. "Physically, I'm almost back to 100%. Emotionally, well, I'm still processing everything. But having a safe home and seeing the kids happy, it helps a lot." Michael nodded, understanding. Silence hung between them for a moment, laden with unspoken words and complex emotions. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. "Sarah, I asked you here today because I want your input on something." He turned his computer monitor toward her, showing her the New Beginnings Foundation document. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the text. As she read, her eyebrows rose in surprise. "Michael, this is impressive. An entire foundation devoted to helping displaced families." Michael nodded. "It's only the beginning. I want to use Reeves Enterprises' resources to make a real difference in people's lives. Not just build houses, but rebuild entire communities." Sarah kept reading, occasionally stopping to ask questions or suggest changes. Her perspective, as someone who had lived through the experience of losing everything, was invaluable. Michael found himself taking notes at a frenetic pace. "It all looks great on paper," Sarah finally said, leaning back in her chair. "But Michael, do you really understand these families' needs? It's not just about providing a roof. It's about restoring a sense of community, of belonging." Michael hesitated. "Honestly, no, I don't fully understand." "That's why I need your help, Sarah. You and the kid, you can show me what really matters." Sarah studied him for a long moment, as if gauging his sincerity. At last, she nodded. "All right, let's do it. But on one condition." "What's that?" Michael asked, eager. "You have to come with us, not just to meetings or charity events. I want you to see firsthand what life is like for these families, to really understand the impact of your actions, past and future." Michael felt a mix of apprehension and determination. The idea of facing the full consequences of his past actions was daunting, but he knew it was necessary. "Agreed," he said firmly. "When do we start?" Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How about right now? There's a place I want to show you." Hours later, Michael found himself in a neighborhood he barely recognized. Dilapidated houses lined narrow streets, many clearly abandoned. Children played in makeshift playgrounds built from old tires and wooden planks. The air felt heavy with a near-palpable sense of despair. "This," Sarah said softly, "is what's left of Oakwood, one of the first neighborhoods your company revitalized." Michael felt his stomach twist. He vaguely remembered Oakwood, one of his early projects, one that first put him on the map as a successful developer. At the time, he'd celebrated the profits without ever considering the human cost. "My God," he murmured, watching an entire family squeeze into a rusty old trailer. "I had no idea." Sarah watched him closely. "It's easy not to know when you don't have to face the consequences of your actions, Michael. But these people? They live with those consequences every day." As they walked through the neighborhood, Sarah pointed out places and people, telling their stories. Old Mr. Johnson, who lost the hardware store his family had run for 3 generations. Young Maria, who had to drop out of school to help care for her younger siblings when the family lost their home. Each story was like a stab to Michael's heart. He'd spent years convincing himself that progress justified any cost. Now, seeing the faces and hearing the stories of those who'd paid that cost, he felt only shame and a burning desire to make things right. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to help, not just with money or new houses. I want to rebuild all of this. The community, the businesses, the hope. How do we do that? Sarah looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. For a moment, Michael saw in her not just the mother of Emma, Olivia, Ethan and Noah, but the community leader she'd been before his actions forced her to fight solely for survival. Well, she began slowly, first, we have to listen to the people. Really listen. Find out what they need, what they want for their future. We can't just impose our vision of how things should be. Michael nodded, already making mental plans. We could hold community assemblies, not just for Oakwood, but for every neighborhood affected by our past projects. And for future projects too, Sarah added. If we're really going to change things, we need to rethink completely how we approach urban development. In the months that followed, Michael threw himself wholeheartedly into this new challenge. The New Beginnings Foundation was officially launched with much media fanfare, but the real work took place far from the spotlight. Guided by Sarah and the children, Michael spent countless hours in neighborhoods like Oakwood. He listened to stories, dried tears, and gradually began to truly understand the impact of his past actions. Emma and Olivia, with their childlike innocence and unique perspective, often provided surprising insights. It was Emma's idea to create reading clubs in each neighborhood after noticing how many kids lacked access to books. Olivia, meanwhile, suggested community gardens, recalling fondly the small garden they'd had in Mill Creek. As the Foundation's projects took shape, Michael also began to completely overhaul Reeves Enterprises' approach to urban development. Affordable housing became a priority, along with preserving local businesses and community spaces. One day, while reviewing plans for Oakwood's revitalization, Sarah made a comment that changed everything. "You know, Michael," she said, pointing at the design, "this all looks great on paper, but have you asked people what they actually want in a home?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. Well, we have market research, demographics." Sarah shook her head, a compassionate smile on her lips. "Data is important, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Come with me. I want to show you something." She led him to a small park in what was left of old Oakwood. There, a group of children played, their laughter echoing in the afternoon air. "See that tree?" Sarah pointed to an old oak. "That's where all the neighborhood kids used to gather after school. And that bench? That's where the elderly would sit and play chess on weekends. These are the things that make a house a home, Michael. Not just walls and a roof, but memories and connections." Michael looked at the scene with new eyes. "I think I understand," he said slowly. "We're not just building structures, we're recreating a home." Sarah smiled, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "Exactly. And that's why we need to listen to people. Really listen." From that day on, Reeves Enterprises' planning process changed drastically. Michael instituted a series of community forums where future residents could voice their needs and desires. Emma and Olivia, fulfilling their roles as junior consultants, often participated, offering fresh ideas and perspectives. One particularly moving initiative emerged when Olivia casually mentioned how she missed the small community garden they'd had back in Mill Creek. "Mommy always took us there to plant tomatoes," she said, a touch of nostalgia in her young voice. That simple observation led to the creation of community gardens in all of Reeves Enterprises' new developments. Not only did they provide fresh produce for residents, but they also became gathering places, strengthening community bonds. As the months passed, Michael's transformation became increasingly evident. The man who once viewed people as mere figures on a spreadsheet now spent hours talking to future residents, hearing their stories and worries. Sarah, for her part, blossomed in her new role as a consultant to the foundation. Her personal experience and passion for community made her a powerful, respected voice. Michael often found himself admiring her strength and resolve, grateful to have her as a partner in this undertaking, even as their relationship remained strictly professional. Finally, after months of hard work, the big day arrived, the inauguration of the new Oakwood. The neighborhood was a vision of modern, sustainable community living. Affordable homes and apartments mingled harmoniously with green areas, playgrounds, and communal spaces. The old oak tree, which Sarah had pointed out so many months before, stood as the heart of the new Central Park. Michael once again stood before a podium, but this time the atmosphere was pure celebration. "A year ago," he began, "we made a promise not just to rebuild houses, but to rebuild homes, not just to construct buildings, but to rebuild a community. Today, I'm proud to say we've fulfilled that promise." Applause erupted from the crowd, many of them with tears in their eyes. Michael saw familiar faces, people he'd met along the way, each with their own story of loss and hope. "But this isn't the end," Michael continued. "It's only the beginning. The real work of building a community happens every day. In the small interactions, the friendships formed, the traditions created, and that, my friends, is something we'll do together." After the speech, as families explored their new homes, Sarah approached Michael, the twins and babies by her side. "You did it," she said softly, a genuine smile on her face. Michael shook his head. "We did it, all of us." That evening, after the festivities, Michael led Sarah and the children to a special house in the heart of the new neighborhood. "I have one more surprise," he said, smiling. When he opened the door, Sarah gasped. The house was perfect, spacious yet cozy, with touches that recalled their old home. On the walls were photos of the family, smiling down at them. "Michael," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes, It's beautiful." "It's yours," Michael said simply. "If you want it." Sarah looked at him, a mixture of emotions on her face. "Michael, it's too much, I can't accept it." Michael shook his head. "Please, Sarah. It's not a debt or an obligation. It's a new beginning for you and the kids, a chance to rebuild your life in the community you helped shape." Emma and Olivia were already darting from room to room, exclaiming in delight at every discovery. The babies, now almost a year old, watched with wide eyes from their strollers. Sarah hesitated a moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Michael. This means a lot to us." A few weeks later, the Thompson family had fully settled into their new home. Michael visited regularly, always keeping a respectful distance, aware that despite everything they'd been through together, he was still partly responsible for their initial suffering. Ethan and Noah's first birthday came quickly. Sarah held a small party in the new home's backyard, inviting neighbors and friends from the community. Of course, Michael was invited, arriving with gifts for the twins and a large basket of plants for the community garden Sarah had started. As he watched the children play, the adults chat and laugh, Michael felt a wave of emotion. This scene, so simple yet so powerful, was the tangible result of his journey toward redemption. Sarah approached him, offering a slice of cake. "A penny for your thoughts," she said gently. Michael smiled, accepting the cake. "I'm just grateful for all of this, for you and the kids giving me a chance to do what's right." Sarah nodded, her gaze drifting to the children. "You know, Michael, when we first met, I hated you. I thought you were the worst kind of person, but now I see that people can change. They can choose to be better." "Thank you, Sarah," Michael replied, feeling the weight of her words. "That means more than you can imagine." As the party continued around them, Michael reflected on his journey. From a cold, calculating man focused only on profit, he had transformed into someone who valued people above all else. He wasn't perfect, he still made mistakes, but he was committed to learning and growing. And though his relationship with Sarah remained platonic, a constant reminder of the complexities of their shared past, Michael knew he'd found something far more valuable than romance. He had found purpose, redemption, and a kind of family he'd never imagined possible. Watching Emma and Olivia help the twins open their presents, seeing Sarah chatting animatedly with neighbors, Michael finally understood the true meaning of community. It wasn't about buildings or projects. It was about connections, about belonging. With a smile, he joined the children, helping the twins assemble their new toys. The future was still uncertain, and there was much work to be done, but for the first time in his life, Michael Reeves was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he needed to do. And that, he realized, was the true meaning of home.